there, I'm Nicole King, broker owner of 41 Realty Group. I'm here at Dynamic Analysis with Sam Hensler, the owner, and we're here to chat a bit about what is going on in the greater Yellowstone Valley area. Kind of the elephant in the room that everybody's been hearing a lot about is some foundation and soil movement and things out in Copper Ridge. We are definitely not going to talk specifically about Copper Ridge today, but Sam, and he's going to give you all of his credentials here in just a moment, but he is well versed in soils and foundations as a structural engineer, and I just wanted him to tell us kind of what to expect from areas around the Billings area as far as soils and structure and what people should really be looking for in homes in those areas and how they can best take care of their homes so it can last as long for them in the best condition possible. So thanks for meeting with me, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So tell us about you, your credentials, and why we should rely on you as an expert.
Sure. So MSU grad and graduated with a degree in engineering at MSU. Went on to design uranium processing plants for a company out in Bozeman for 5 years, and worked on building designs and infrastructure and large industrial designs, and then moved out to Billings, where I got involved in more building and residential specific construction and the design for those, and something I had never heard of, but the need for structural engineers to evaluate homes that were being bought and sold, which was not something that I had seen before, but apparently happens pretty often here.
Yes.
And then now I do about 800 of those a year.
800 every year. So visiting existing residential structures to evaluate their structural integrity?
Yep.
Okay. So when you get called out, what are the things that you see most often?
Yeah, it depends on the area. Certain areas have specific issues, whether they're relating to the soils in that area. For instance, if we go south of the river, then the soil changes completely, and now we're worrying about heaving soils that are pushing up on slabs and pushing all the guts of the home up and potentially lifting the floor or the roof up off the foundation.
Okay.
So things like that are more concerning once we go there. If we're going along the rims, then we've got issues with slope stability and rockfall and collapsible materials and air pockets and all sorts of weird shifting in the debris field of a former landslide. If we're going out in areas where you have a lot of soil that was deposited by wind, like the northwest portion of Billings, there's a lot of compressible and collapsible soils that can move foundations. If we're looking at the older part of town, then we're looking at a lot of foundations that may not have that many usable years left, depending on how they were originally constructed and how well they've been taken care of for the last 100 years.
Okay.
A lot of times there's homes that have been heavily modified because they used to build homes pretty small and would just add on to them. And I see a lot of homes that have had bearing walls removed or portions of the walls that are meant to hold the building up in a windstorm. A lot of times people will dig out underneath their floor and put upgraded utilities like a large furnace or water heaters or things like that, and they'll undermine their foundation because it was only 6 inches deep to begin with, and then a simple hose being left on could cause the foundation to collapse at that point. So it really depends on the issue and what part of town you're in and when your house was built and how well it was taken care of and what kind of soil it's on.
Okay. So if you're thinking of giving homeowners, either people who are about to be homeowners or currently homeowners, some advice on things that they need to be doing kind of no matter what area of town they live in, what are some major things that they really need to be doing to make their house last for them?
Sure. So the number one thing that everyone's probably heard of by now is just keeping good drainage, and there's a lot of reasons why keeping good drainage is important. For areas that have hydrosensitive soils that will react when water is mixed in with them, so like a swelling soil like we have south of the river, or a collapsing soil that we have up along the rims or in the northwest part of town that will collapse when they get wet, it's really important that we keep the soil underneath the foundation dry to prevent it from moving. But also, for instance, if you're in Laurel where there's high alkalinity in the water and in the soil, it will react chemically with the concrete and dissolve the foundation out from underneath the house.
Doesn't sound like a good thing.
No, it doesn't.
Nope.
And it happens to a lot of homes out there. It's a slower process, but a lot of those homes are in that age where I have seen foundations completely converted back to sand. And we've had to replace foundations just because it dissolved, disintegrated right underneath the house because water was pulling up and carrying sulfides into the concrete where it would evaporate in the dry basement air and build up and disintegrate the concrete. We get frost heave out here. Any times that you get freezing conditions, which we can't really avoid unless you heat a space. So if you have an unheated garage, it's an issue. If you have a shallow foundation, that's an issue. If you have frost susceptible soils, which are fine particled soils like silts and clays, which we have
all over.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have moisture, which also can't really get rid of. Then you're going to get frost heave. So that'll lift up on any slabs that are unheated throughout the year. So like garages, we'll see a lot of slab heave movement, which will change the drainage of the slab and potentially cause all your water shed from your car to drain towards the foundation and cause further issues in the foundation.
Yeah.
There is lots of spalling, like freeze thaw of spalling just in concrete that gets beat by the sun. Concrete's really porous, so water will actually absorb into it, which is not something a lot of people know, but water can pass through concrete fairly easily, just really slowly. And so if you have in the spring, while you're getting lots of freeze thaw, the water will move into the concrete and the foundation and then freeze at night and can pop things off, and you'll get a bunch of spalling along your foundation as the thickness of the foundation wall just kind of erodes, and then you can start to expose rebar, which will get wet, and then that'll rust and expand and pop your foundation more. So a lot of things mostly related to water damage to the foundation and the soils beneath the foundation.
So what are some of the most common reasons that you see water go towards the foundation? Is it sloping towards, planting gardens next to the houses? Tell us what you're seeing most often.
Drainage for sure, and especially in new homes, it's really common when they're building a house, they dig down to the bottom of the foundation and they build everything up from there, and then they put the soil back in, they backfill it up along the foundation wall. And a lot of times it doesn't get compacted very well in that spot. So right along the foundation wall, it can get pretty fluffy, and you'll have your landscaper set your landscaping drainage so that it's draining away from the home, but within the first couple years, all that air that's trapped underneath the surface there can escape, and all of a sudden that drainage starts to collapse and turn negative, and now you're draining back towards your foundation. That's probably the most common thing I see, especially in newer homes, is just over time that backfill slumps, and now you have negative drainage and need to redo your landscaping. Gutters are another thing. A lot of people just let their gutters drip right next to the foundation, and then water pools up there. So you need some good extenders on there.
How long should extenders go?
I like 6 feet. It doesn't matter too much as long as it's discharging the stormwater in an area that has positive drainage, is taking the water away from the foundation. It doesn't really matter how long they are if it just comes pouring right back to the house.
I see a lot of times that they terminate inside gardens where it's got like a concrete barrier, all the water goes up against that, and then it just stays in that garden. So getting it on the other side of whatever edging someone might have, things like that.
Ideally, so newer homes you'll see where they have the concrete edging, the little curbing that's between 3 and 6 feet around the home. And so if you can kick it out over that, that's ideal. And in an area where you don't need to remove it for lawn mowing, because people tend not to put it back.
Yes, I see that a lot.
But a lot of places will do underground discharges. So the downspout will actually go underground, and it'll either come out and pop up in the yard somewhere, or it will go to an underground drain field. Depending on where the house is located, if you have hydrosensitive soils, it's generally not a good idea to inject the water underneath the surface, because those sorts of soils don't accept water very readily. So if you can keep it on the surface, it's more likely to just roll away. But as soon as you get it underground, then it's just going to percolate in and get into an area where it's really not supposed to. So I tend to stay away with subterranean discharges if I can. If you can keep it on the surface and just let gravity do all the work, it works out better more often.
Perfect. Is there anything that you see a lot that you wish people would just stop doing that we haven't talked about yet?
So many things.
Top two.
Let's see. I'm gonna have to think about that for a little bit. Let's see. So I work on both ends of a structural lifespan. So I design new things for people to build, and I do forensic evaluations of things that are failing.
Sure.
And it costs much more money to fix something that's failing than it does to just build something correctly from the get-go.
That's
so I
understandable.
think the biggest thing is just making sure that even if you're doing a simple retaining wall or just about any structure, a lot of things are more complicated than people really understand. And even if they have a contractor who they think is really competent in certain areas, if you're doing anything that's outside the norm, it's a good idea to get a professional involved and have their opinion weigh in and see what really needs to be done. A lot of people think it's expensive to spend a couple hundred or maybe a couple thousand up front on a design, but compared to spending tens of thousands of dollars to come back and fix it later, it's much cheaper.
Yeah, I see the tens of thousands to fix something when I enter the picture as a real estate agent a lot.
Yeah.
So I would love if they would get a hold of you first.
Yeah,
on most
absolutely.
things. Let's switch to not just getting water away from the house, but what are some things, a lot of times I see ventilation not proper in attics, bathrooms that the vents discharge into the attic. What kind of structural problems can that cause?
So see pretty hefty mold and water damage in certain circumstances. I think the worst I've seen is either dryer vents or furnace vents venting into an attic or into a crawl space and completely demolishing all the framing.
Okay.
You can definitely get the same thing with bathroom vents because there's a lot of moisture that you're moving into the attic, and that wood will soak up that moisture and you can get mold growth. If you have OSB sheeting for your roofing, that will soak it up right away and lose a lot of its structural integrity and start to grow mold pretty quickly. In general, keeping the moisture outside the building envelope is a good idea. You don't want to dump it anywhere inside of the area you're trying to keep the environmental conditions out of.
Okay. So if somebody is worried that they have some structural problems, things that they're like, I don't really know if this is quite right, if this is the way I should be doing it, when is the point that they should probably get a hold of you or someone like you?
Well, in general, if you're going to build any sort of structure, if you're not working with a contractor that is reputable and understands what they're doing and going through the appropriate permitting process, because you need to permit almost everything. There's a handful of things you don't need a building permit for, but in general, in order to get a permit, you need to have a plan. It'll be reviewed by the city. If the city doesn't feel that the contractor's plan is done appropriately or isn't considering all of the possible issues that could arise, then they'll request that an engineer take a look at it, and then it comes to me. Or you can start there and have an engineer take a look at it first and develop a plan, or an architect. Anyone who knows what they're doing, basically, and going through the right channels to make sure that it gets done correctly.
Okay, sounds good. Is there, how do people get a hold of you and find out about your services?
I'm online. You can Google dynamic analysis or structural engineering and Billings, and
there
I should pop up
okay.
there somewhere. And then my number, you can email me through the website or reach out to me. I think I'm on Facebook, but I'm not. I am on Facebook, but I'm not on Facebook often.
I get to follow all your fun snow adventures and things like that on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
Yep. This is actually the geology of the area. So you can see that we've got all this shale layers here and how it mirrors with where our high expansive potential clays are out here. And there are some developments that are out here and in these areas of really high swell capacity. So you can see pretty significant damages from those sorts of things. Here's landslide potential, which people don't really think about that often, but landslide or slope instability, You can see a lot right underneath the rims. You can see it sometimes in the hills, in the Black Hills regions, and anywhere where you have these really slippery shale slopes with this heavy clay on top of it, they can move a little bit. There's some parts in town that are a recent landslide that has been undercut to have a canal run through it and has a bunch of houses stop on top. And that is not very stable soil either. So there's a lot of parts in town that have certain issues. Here's where the rockfall hazards are.
You mean the ones that we might have a crushing boulder from somebody's living room?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Sam Hensler with Dynamic Analysis. We're here to look at a house, do a structural inspection, and take a look at any issues we might find. Need something that looks. This is the hydrostatic head of the water. If I go up, pressure decreases. I go down, the pressure increases. It converts that to inches for me.
Yeah, interesting.
So I tear it like a scale in one spot of the house. Usually I do it around the stairs. Just as the roof diaphragm pulls, is getting pulled by this wall here. So you can kind of see it in action there too. Like this corner kind of tugging on it there. And then we just got our split right along here. Just a little bit of tensile stress from the sinking here. And when you have big open areas like this, it's really hard to avoid.
But you think that's something I can go back in?
Yeah. I think most of that's going to be related to the settlement. Like I said, there's a chance it could be story drift, which story drift is when you have a big windstorm across here. A little bit of stress in the tape as everything gets stretched and pulled.
And what those corner ones? Those are the ones that scare me.
Yeah, so this is going to be the bending stress from any north and south walls. We're going to see little cracks coming off the corners, just because this wall does have some bending stress in it, because this side's sinking, so it pulls on this wall, and you tend to see them in the perforations, just like you do in concrete. So we'll have a crack here and here, just because this whole wall is bending a little bit, but we have these big perforations in the wall, and so like a graham cracker, it's gonna crack where all the perforations are at. So it's going to crack right around the windows. The walls are going to try and reserve a piece of the drywall back, which you can see it doing right here, and right there, as there's just a little bit of stretching in the roof, because the roof is all acting like one big sheet. Right on the edge, just a little bit. And that's going to be from this side coming down, so it pulls the jamb down with it. And then the hinges here are staying up a little bit higher. The door's hanging off of this side, so as the jamb comes down on this side, then you can bind the door. And you can see we're just, that's way too bright. We're just binding just the very corner. Okay. So it's probably hung a little tight to begin with, because we don't have that much difference across this wall. We have a little bit, but it's probably hung pretty tight. Came down a 1/16 of an inch and started binding the corner of the door. And that you can fix by just sanding this guy.
Yeah.
And then you shouldn't have any problems.
They cut right through that.
Yeah, no, they literally just obliterated that joist there. And we should at least probably put in some web stiffeners above that post. It's a really minor thing. It's an annoying minor thing, because it's like, if you're going to do it, this obviously was done when the house was built. So on normal houses, the siding would come down and meet the foundation flush.
Okay.
This means we got an extra thick foundation wall, which means this was designed as a retaining wall. Which means we should have a nice big footing underneath of this. So this was actually probably designed by an architect or an engineer, or at least a contractor who really knew what they were doing, hopefully. Someone to resist all the lateral pressure here. And one of the biggest issues out here is you have all this weight.
Yeah.
And when it gets saturated, it starts to act a little fluid. and that applies a huge pressure to these walls and it just pushes them in. So a lot of the older houses here, you look down these walls and you can see where they're just bowing in. And then there's lots of cracks down them. If there's any interior concrete walls, that's acting like a buttress. It'll break around those walls. If you look down this guy, you can see it's nice and straight. So it's actually designed to resist all these forces. I think it's just a well-designed home. You know, I don't know if it's on piers or not. Just a handful of cracks we're seeing from settlement. You know, got this crack around a large perforation in the wall, which is going to be, I mean, it's really hard to avoid those. If the foundation moves at all, it's going to crack around perforation. So that's pretty expected, and that's something that you can get sealed with a structural epoxy.
Okay.
Like Simpson makes a concrete injected low viscosity, CILV is what they call it, and that'll seal that and rebond it. It'll be nice and strong again. But it seems to be built pretty well. It's been here for 25 years. It's behaving very well for a lot of houses I look up here. I mean, the only red flag I really have is it's just this location just is not a stable location.
Yeah.
But it's worked for the last 25 years. That obviously is nothing in geologic time.
Right.
But if we were having the issues that most of the houses see out here, they'd show up in the first 10 years. And certainly in the first big rainstorm. Because the house is definitely, you know, it's moved. It's moved
Right.
about an inch. And that's just going to produce plenty of cracking in the drywalls because it's a rigid element. When it gets tied to the framing and the framing starts to shift, it's going to tear the drywall. As long as the foundation doesn't really move much more, then you're not going to see more cracks propagate. If they do all of a sudden, then maybe we do have movement. And we're definitely not out of the weeds here. I mean, isn't a zero-risk house.
Right.
But it's got, all the signs are pointing towards it behaving well. There's no reason other than its general location to be nervous about it. And the fact that it's been here for 25 years without a problem is good, but it's still no guarantee.
Yeah.
I mean, look at plenty of houses that are 40 years old that haven't had issues that all of a sudden have a lot of issues. And it's really hard. A lot of those are due to poor management or maintenance of the house, just not keeping up on top of drainage and just letting things pool and freeze and it kind of reaches a breaking point, or letting dogs, I've seen dogs dig out all over the foundation to the point where it's like we've got a hole and it's just filling with water, you know, and it's been doing that for a decade now, and it's finally overwhelmed the foundation. You know, a house in this area, I'd be most concerned about a landslide. And if that were to happen, not like a landslide like this comes out and takes out your house, that would be bad too, but I don't think that's going to happen. But a landslide where some part of the hill here shifts down. So this all goes down, and this all the soil that the house is built on rotates, and then the excess bulges out in the bottom. That's a common failure when you're in this steep landslide debris, and that's just slope instability. And when that happens, there's just not really anything you can do that makes a lot of economic sense if you haven't proved that it's an issue. Because the only way to do that is to come in and, you know, like they did it around the Beartooth Pass, where you just drill in, stabilize the earth, make sure it's not going anywhere. I think the worst one I saw is in the newer material on Mountain View Boulevard across 27th. One house did that 18 inches.
Oh my God.
And it was on piers. So, I mean, which doesn't matter because all the soil that the piers are in, it's all moving.
Right.
So all the ground rotates out. So that's really like the biggest, highest, like low risk, high consequence. You know, the chance of that it happens is pretty low in our lifetime. I mean, just no way to say. And this soil here is much more stable than it is across 27th. That's a much more recent landslide. So that soil is just not stable at all. Almost all those houses have had that happen. And I only see certain houses that are really high up on this landslide debris have that issue. I mean, maybe 2 along this whole side of 27th. So just saying it could happen.
Right.
But it hasn't happened for the last 25 years, and we just don't know if it would happen again. It's just there's a non-zero chance that it could happen. About the same as having a rock come topple and crush the house. So if that doesn't scare you, then this really shouldn't scare you that much either, because they're pretty close to the same probability.
Okay.
They're both low risk, high consequence.
Right.
You know, that's
Right.
probably higher consequence because that could potentially kill you.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
A lot of times people have these big retaining walls, and just so rarely retaining walls they're just not built correctly that often.
No.
So they tend to lean out from all the forces they have to deal with, and then that creates all this void space behind them that all the soil settles into. The foundation sitting on that soil will sink with it. So a lot of houses in like Reberg Ranch area have that issue where they have giant retaining walls holding up the soil that holds up the house, and the retaining walls weren't built correctly, and they need to.
You almost make it
Fix
seem I
those.
want to go get a condo downtown.
Yeah.
Floor.
I mean, if you build a house that's in a geologically interesting area, like there's a lot that you have to consider.
Yeah.
You know, like it's going to be more active. Obviously, there's a reason it looks the way that it looks.
Right.
It's going to have more interesting soil dynamics, which is another reason why it looks the way that it looks. So, if you're building a piece of land in flat land, I mean, mostly you're just worried about how high does the water get.
Yeah.
That's usually the only concern. Sometimes there's weird concerns. If there's heaving soils, then you got to worry about heaving. But yeah, I mean, there's issues everywhere you go. Go south of the river, then it's all bentonite. Come up along the rims, it's all collapsible soils. Go into town, it's nice sandy gravel, but then all the houses are really old, and everyone's done all these DIY additions on them, and those are starting to fall apart. And
Yeah, bad.
so, but I look at a lot of good houses too. So.